Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to get started in just one more moment. I still see a lot of people signing in. Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited about today's webinar, and we'll get started in just another moment. I'm still seeing the attendance number shoot up. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to join us today and to learn a new skill. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Allison Weiss, and I'm the Associate Director of Corporate and Executive Education at the Brown School of Professional Studies. We are so excited to have you here today for this free masterclass on core leadership skills in strategic thinking. And before we get started on the webinar and diving into this incredible session, I wanted to take just a moment to welcome you to the virtual space that you are occupying here at the Brown School of Professional Studies. If you were here with us in person, this is the view that you would have. You would see the pedestrian bridge and see us in the downhill side of the Brown campus. And our mission at the Brown School of Professional Studies is to empower you with the skills, resources, and tools that you need to change the way the world works for good. We know that we spend over 50% of our waking lives at work, and we know that the way that work is working right now is not working for so many people. We're seeing unprecedented levels of burnout, disengagement. A recent Gallup poll found that 70% of the US workforce reports being disengaged. And we need leaders like you who are passionate enough to show up during your lunch break if you're on the East Coast or during your otherwise busy lives to bring in a new skill set, a new way to lead that is more inclusive, more equitable, more productive, more effective. So thank you all for being here today. And I hope that as you think about your career goals, that you think of the School of Professional Studies as your partner to reaching those. And we offer 3 categories of programming, all on in-demand skills that will help you both advance your own careers and to make the workplace work for everyone. We offer over 17 non-degree programs, which are short courses and certificate programs that are offered as residential, hybrid, or fully online programs that span from just 1 week long programs all the way to 6 months. We have 30 early career master's programs, primarily but not exclusively residential. We also have hybrid and fully online for those of you who are a little bit more in your early career, 0 to 5 years of experience across STEM, social sciences, and humanities. And we offer 3 professional master's programs for those of you who are more mid to senior in your career in executive MBA, healthcare leadership, and technology leadership. And all of those are hybrid. And one of the key differentiators for Brown's executive education programming, we know there's a lot of executive ed out there that you could choose to access, is that we are research-based and we have proven results. All of our programs cluster in these 3 areas of health, data and technology, and leadership. And we have the opportunity to work with you and your employer to customize programming as well. And these are all the different areas of where Brown's expertise overlaps with the job industry's demands. And so regardless of what type of skill you're looking for, we have programs that are kind of listed out here that are all recruiting right now that would help you achieve those. So some of the programs we're recruiting for right now include programs in mindfulness, the Applied Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategies Certificate, our Effective Communication Program, a whole portfolio of coaching-based programs, an applied AI and data science program, an upcoming program on AI ethics, and the 3 master's programs that I mentioned earlier. So regardless of where you are in your career or what format you prefer, we have something that will work for you and help you advance your career and make the impact on the world that you want to make. And even as early as today, as later on in today's webinar, you will have the opportunity to influence the future of our portfolio. So we're really excited. At the end of this, we're going to pull you and ask you what you'd like to see us do next. You'll also have the opportunity to ask questions of our incredible faculty member, Ed Barros. And to do that, please click on the bottom bar of your Zoom, click on the Q&A button, not the chat button, because it's going to come in fast and furious, and type and submit your questions there. I'll be monitoring it throughout, so please submit your question whenever you have one. We also will be sharing a recording and the slides from today afterwards, so don't worry about catching every detail. So with that, I am happy to introduce our incredible faculty lead today, Ed Barros. Ed Barros is a professor of the practice in leadership, and he has over 25 years of experience teaching in strategy, strategic leadership, and leadership development. He is an International Coaching Federation certified coach and a member of Harvard's Institute of Coaching. And prior to this, had a long career at the Duke Corporate Education. He also has a lot more experience, but I think that's probably enough for a taste for now. So with that, I am going to hand things over to you, Ed. Thank you so much for being here and for teaching us on this crucial leadership skill of strategic thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. I appreciate that wonderful intro. It's not as sunny and nice here as Allison's pictures would lead you to believe. So it's a little snowy as I look out the window here today, but it's a delight to have you here. See some of my students. I know for today at Brown, we're actually kicking off our Master in Technology leadership starts today. So if you're on from that cohort, it's nice to meet you this way. I'll be seeing a lot more of you over the next 16 months. So I want to talk over the course of the next 45 minutes about strategic thinking. But before I do, I'm going to give you a little preamble as to our thoughts on leadership skills. Allison pointed out so thoughtfully, here in the School of Professional Studies at Brown, we're really here to transform the world of work for good. And what that means is working like leaders as yourself at all levels in organizations to really not only incorporate strategic thinking, but a variety of other skills. I saw Pete put in the chat, really starting to face burnout. There's a variety of topics that we're facing in organizations today that are related to challenges we're having. So we want to think about, and we certainly want your input in terms of what we can do here to help with that. But be that as it may, what I want to do over the course of the next few minutes is talk to you about this practice and skill called strategic thinking. So I'll give you a little bit of a preamble on the Lessons in Leadership program that we have here, the webinar series that will extend for a year. I want to just dive very quickly into the current, what I'll call state of skills. Some of you probably are facing this or feeling this, so I'm glad that you're here. We had a lot of people signed up for this, over 700 people. So I'm delighted to spend time sharing with you, and then you can obviously go back to the recording, or hopefully helping you incorporate some of this, I'll call repertoire of skills into your day-to-day work, and then really give you, usually you put next steps or the way ahead. I'm going to give you a little homework as a professor and some action steps you can do to start moving up the curve wherever you are in the area of strategic thinking. So the Lessons in Leadership series here at Brown School of Professional Studies is going to extend it. It's been going on for a while, but this particular one is going to go over the course of the full year. We've got a lot of great information tools from not just myself, but other faculty members on areas such as sustainability, healthcare. We have a raft of programs in addition to the webinars you can take advantage of. But this particular set of webinars is around what we're calling core leadership skills. And the purpose is really to provide some thoughts, insights, and I would say tools are equally as important for you, whether you're an individual contributor, whether you're a leader or a manager of other leaders at some point in your career, or even up into the senior leader ranks, really to help you not only develop yourself, but develop talent of the people with you and build those skills in what's proving to be a pretty dynamic environment. So let's talk about skills just for a moment before we jump into the particular skill of strategic thinking. If you ask people, what are the kind of skills you need as a leader? You'll hear a lot of the same things, and there's a good reason for that. We expect leaders to have a certain suite of skills and capabilities. But when we look at the broader environment, this isn't just individual organizations. This is actually economies and countries. McKinsey did some work a couple of years ago on defining the skills that are needed for the future of the world of work. 18,000 participants in 15 countries talking about the skills that leaders will need in skill categories going forward as the economies that we live in evolve. BCG and the Burning Glass Institute did a landmark survey as well last year. Actually, I think it was in 2022, to identify some top trends, which I'll talk about here in a moment. We see this from the World Economic Forum as recently as just this past year, less than a year ago, on what are the skills in the future of jobs. That's almost a 300-page report. And interesting about the BCG report is they looked at 15 million different job postings. So we have more data, given that we live in the world, in the era of big data, than we've ever had before. But what are some of the salient trends? I thought there were a couple of things right at the start of the BCG Burning Glass report that you'd find interesting. This shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone that digital skills, digital fluency are essential in the job market of the future, and they're not just limited to IT roles. Communicating data and information visually is exceptionally important. You see analytics that people are diving into. We're getting more and more information. 15 million jobs reviewed has to be presented in a way that gives us information and insights without going into all the details. Related to that, social media skills are becoming increasingly important. I have teenagers, some of you probably do or will soon or have had them. They live on social media, but more and more organizations are living in social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, you pick it. What is equally as important related to these aforementioned skills are the softer skills. Visual communication, social media, and digital are all led by people who have skills in face-to-face communication, written communication, relationship building, and the like across all skill groups and populations. We're going to focus today on, and really over the course of the next 12 months, because our Lessons in Leadership series will happen one per month for this particular topic on core leadership skills for the balance of this year. So this is just the first of many, hopefully, opportunities we'll have to chat about this. So what are the skills you need as a leader? Well, think about leaders you've worked with. I'm going to give you a chance to think about that more deliberately in a minute. Leaders have to be able to communicate effectively, whether it's in the written or a verbal form. In the classes that I've taught in the past, I tend to focus a lot on writing. That's a lost skill in some areas. But as Carl Weick, the researcher, has said famously, how will I know what I think until I see what I said? So it's important to be able to write effectively. We like to think, unfortunately, in some cases, that we get promoted based on the great work that we do, and people do. But often it's important to present oneself and build a personal brand that says, I have executive presence. We'll talk about that as a skill too, but we see that very commonly in organizations that leaders, as they advance, need to have more gravitas. They need to build a personal brand. As you become more senior, and many of you know this, the problems don't get any easier, they get harder. The difficult problems are the ones that kind of make it up to the leaders who can solve them. But you need to have strong relationship building skills in organizations to succeed. As I look back at my career in the military, I spent 20 years doing military service. I would have people, when I transitioned into the civilian sector, say, it must be very easy to be in the military. You can just tell people what to do and they do it. That couldn't be further from the truth. People don't do things because you tell them to. They do things because you have a good relationship with them. But part of that relationship has to do with building talent. Talent has to do with building effective teams, being able to sell and influence the ideas that you have, changing the organization to adapt to the VUCA world we live in, collaborating outside of the boundaries of the organizations that we work in. Here at Brown, we're right in the middle of Providence, so we obviously have to have a great relationship with the geographies and the institutions that surround us, which we do. Leaders get paid to get things done. So leaders have to be able to execute effectively at the end of the day. All these skills are important, but they really tie to getting the things done that we ask leaders to do. Part of that is helping build a culture of effectiveness and high performance. And strategic thinking, unsurprisingly, is part of that. But it begins with understanding who I am and what skills and who you have as a leader. So a colleague and I, Laura Downing's her name, we, for the past several years, have been working with leaders inside the Fortune literally 100 organizations. And we started seeing, as we were teaching in these top tier programs, the same skills coming up over and over. So, and this was actually pre-pandemic, probably 2019, 20, we actually sat down and based on our own observations and some secondary research with organizations that train leaders for a living, similar to what we do here at Brown, and published information. We said, what are the skills if we were to kind of aggregate them into the high density, high frequency skills? Not because high potential leaders need them, they do need them. But what about everybody else in organizations who may not be earmarked initially for quote unquote high potential leadership? These are skills everybody needs. So what we did was we really kind of, I would say, created, but more curated a model that you see here on the right-hand panel that I've got in front of you. Now, what's interesting about it, I won't belabor the point, what we found, which I thought was kind of interesting because we didn't have this point of view going in, was these kind of areas emerge that are, in a sense, tensions or opposites. So if you're going to think strategically, it's got to be with the forethought of getting results. If you're going to communicate effectively, that helps drive change. If you're going to develop talent, that should help you incorporate and build teams. So within each of the 6 areas, there's a series of skills, what we call 12 skills that are embedded in there. So what we did from that was we took the framework, we put it into the format of a book, which came out last summer. We've created a couple of different self-assessments. We've got a workbook that goes along with it for each of the chapters. And then we've got a website, a book site that supports it. So what we'll be covering today, if you're interested, you can go to the 12 skills site, just type it in there. You can just go all the way to the very bottom. You'll see workbook. You can download that if you're inclined to follow along. And throughout the balance of the year, we'll be having a new workbook every month if you want to take that. Now, I would encourage you, if you're an individual, you can go through that. Leadership is a craft. To get better at it, you have to practice it. So this gives you the ability to do so. If you're a team leader, it's a great tool to develop talent. And you'll see from the discussion we're going to have today for the balance of the day, this is a great opportunity for you to share. And then as Allison was talking about, if there's any interest in organizational leadership and looking at a broader set of managers, Brown can help with that. So let's talk about strategic thinking. Well, why is strategic thinking important? Well, it's fascinating because I'm surprised at how timely the topic is, especially since Laura and I started talking about it years ago. A colleague from my previous life, Dory Clark, some of you probably have this book, The Art of the Long Game or The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. I think it was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. Just last month, rather the month before, in Harvard Business Review, an article was put together by I think it's Rainer Strack and his colleagues from BCG on how to use strategic thinking for your life. There's a fantastic video that they put out, which is related to the article. If you haven't seen it, it's quite interesting. You should enjoy that. And then some of you know Michael Watkins from his first 90 days. This book literally came out, I think, 2 weeks ago, at the beginning of January, on the disciplines of strategic thinking. And judging by the number of people that have signed up for this, it's an important topic and one people want to learn more about. But why? Well, the bottom line is markets are changing very rapidly. We had someone come in to Brown this morning. We were talking about the head of learning and development of a large organization locally. And he was talking about the VUCA environment, training senior leaders from the top of the organization down into the organization, especially at technical levels. There's a lot of market volatility and dynamism. I was interviewing a leader about a year or so ago for a program that I was putting together. And the leader said, he was German, and he said, if you had told me a few years ago that we'd have a global pandemic, the likes of which we hadn't seen in 100 years, we'd be having a land war in Europe, the kind we haven't seen in 70 years, and the inflation level that we hadn't seen in 40 years, I wouldn't have believed you. But the reality is it's true. That's what's happening now. And I think for many of us who lived through some of the 70s and 80s, you see how dynamic the world is today. But businesses face a higher risk and greater level of uncertainty from it. There's massive shifts in technology. We've got programs in AI that are coming out just to get our arms and heads around that. But it's changing how work is done. And that's what you saw from the BCG Burning Glass report and the other reports as well, is it's impacting massive changes in job categories. There's a workforce skills disruption index that's actually in the BCG report. So I'd really encourage you to take a look at it. The workforce is changing. There are more people in the workforce of a wider age range than ever before, people from 18 to 80. Leaders have to have the ability to work with all those different people. And we have more diversity than ever before, which is a wonderful thing. But that creates challenges for us as managers and leaders. At the same time, we're being asked to do more with less, right? The workload is increasing for individual managers. That's why Pete pointed out in the chat, feeling some burnout, because there's hardly any time to do the work we have with the people we do. And in certain job categories, there's real skill gaps as well as human capital gaps. You don't even have the people. And the PwC put out their annual CEO survey I think it was maybe last week. And what they said was, what's on the top of CEOs' minds are massive business transformations that are occurring, driven by not just technology, but business model adaptation. So organizations are changing wholesale too. So there's a real need for people at all levels to think strategically. And out of the World Economic Forum report, the one skill that's getting focused on across the board more than anyone else is really in the area of analytical thinking. So this is a very timely topic. So by the end of our discussion today, I want you to be able to think about, what's happening in my organization and where we headed, and be able to do that in languages and terminology, communicate to your peers, to be able to ask thoughtful questions about the future, to be able to make recommendations and what I like to call have a point of view on the future. I think that's really important for leaders at all levels, is to demonstrate and have an informed, well thought out point of view on what you think the future of your industry and business or organization holds. And then help you as a leader individually, or as a team leader, or if you're in the L&D function, helping to train and coach other people and leaders in your organization, maximize your ability to prioritize your efforts to get the most value out of the work you do day to day. I have a quiz for you. Let's be honest here. How well do you think as a strategic thinker today? So you can put your response in the chat if you want to put your number in. You don't have to if you don't want to, but this is it's right out of the book. It's in the workbook too. There's a simple tool that you can just, now 0 is not as good as 3, just so you know. But give yourself a rating. Do you take time to gather diverse information that might impact your business or organization? Do you analyze it, looking for patterns and trends? Do you think about future scenarios that may emerge? Do you share that with the people you work with? I'm going to give you a minute to just sort of jot that down. You can put it in the chat if you want to, if you're brave enough, or if you just want to do it for your own. But be honest. So I see we've got some 7s. That's pretty good. 8, respectable. Okay. Some people are being very honest. And I want to say I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's probably a range, right? We've got 5s and 6s and 7s. If you're in that sort of lower category, that's fine. If you're doing and setting aside more time for this, that's okay too. Our job here is to meet you where you are. Oh, somebody's got a 10. Well done. But the idea is wherever you are on the curve of maturity in this skill is to really try to help you enhance that. And I'm going to give you just a few tips and tools. This will be made available. And I mentioned Allison, my colleagues, if you want me to send you this presentation, I'm happy to send it to you. Just shoot me an email. So we usually start with a definition. What is strategic thinking? You hear a lot of people say, well, I got to see the big picture. There's signals out there in the environment and adjacencies or other arenas. Thanks, Allison, for making note of that. We'll send out the recording as well. I've got to be able to detect weak signals. Pattern recognition, you'll hear that when you talk about strategic thinking, probabilities and if-thens, all these things. But strategic thinking is really about analyzing the problems, opportunities, and challenges that you have, and really putting together this broad perspective of, what's happening today, what may happen in the future, and thinking holistically about how you fit those two things together. Sometimes we either live in the world of too much day to day, or maybe in some cases, too much of the future. We need to bring those things together. But to the points that are being made, so many of us, so many of you face such challenging demands operationally in your roles day to day. You don't have a lot of time to think strategically. In fact, it gets crowded out. The problem is it's a skill, like almost any skill, that can be developed, excuse me, but it takes time and it takes practice. So what are some of the things you can do right away to start to give yourself an enhanced capability in this area? Let's talk about that. All right, so let's give you a little thought experiment. I want you to think about somebody. Now, in honor of my Master in Technology Leadership students who are here starting today, they're not physically here. Just, if you're one of those students and you're worried that you should be here physically in Brown, you're not, don't worry about that. Just online. If you think about the Elon Musks of the world, the Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, people who we oftentimes attribute, great strategic thinking skills to, what is it that makes them great? But really, I'm asking you more closer to home where you work in your organization, past or present. What are some of the characteristics or the behaviors that you've seen? Think of somebody who's a great strategic leader in your mind. And ask yourself, what is it that they do? And feel free to put that in the chat. Okay, Paul says contextualize it, listens well. Justin, forward thinking, absolutely. These are great. I want people to see this. Asking about the art of the possible. Yeah, Ryan, listening. Ryan's a good listener, I know that. Open-minded, great questions. We're oftentimes judged by the questions we ask, not the answers that we give. Putting people at the forefront, listening, motivating, risk-taking, problem solving. These are fantastic, right? thinking through the first and second order effects of decisions, connecting the dots, right? So these are all right on track. But it's good for us to have a model of behavior that we can use in terms of what good looks like. Ask not only what, but in some cases, to Christian's point, I would say why too. Yeah, so we'll talk about more of the diplomacy and things of that nature in a minute. But all of us have somebody that we can picture in our mind who's a great strategic thinker. So the question then becomes, how can, I don't know about the sense of humor, but that's definitely helpful, I think, for leadership in general. So how do you get better at that, right? And I think one of the challenges, and I think all of the information I've seen by and large is helpful, but all work, as a colleague told me many years ago, gets done through a process. Whether the process is well-defined or poorly defined, it's complicated or straightforward, all work gets done through some type of process. So what we've done in the book and what we're doing here is giving you a simple series of steps you can follow through. Now, is this the only way to do it? Are there other ways to do it? Certainly. But what we tried to do is synthesize just enough information in each of the chapters and areas to give you really kind of the 80-20, right? 20% of the information that will give you as a leader or a manager, wherever you are, 80% of the value. So the first step is to gather information. What information is available, is relevant to what I'm wondering or asking about, and then start to internalize that. The next thing, once you've gathered information, and that's an ongoing process, you don't just do it once and stop. As a leader, you have to be committed to ongoing learning. The best leaders are learners. Is analyze that information, is structure it and format it in a way that you can start to identify patterns. It's nice to say, oh, pattern recognition is important, but how do you do that? Organizing your data in a way and working with it in a way that helps you see that is actually important. It's not project, it's project. So once you've gathered and analyzed your data, the analytical turns to the creative, and you start thinking about what could the future look like, or futures. Are there scenarios that might evolve that would help us understand and think about some of the things that could happen, but also ask what are some of the things we want to do today? And then lastly, strategize. Like, it's called strategic thinking, right? So we have to come up with a set of decisions and actions that ideally, or at least be ready to guide us and prioritize our work into the future. So in the next few minutes that we have, I'm going to give you a quick hit on each of these and give you some things you can do right away to get going. The first step can be overwhelming. Gather. Where do I begin? There's changes in our society. There's changes in tastes and preferences. There's changes in the environment. Sustainability is critically important. The geopolitical infrastructure and the geopolitical environment is changing dramatically. Back to my example about what's happening, not just in Europe, in the Middle East, and the Far East. It's impacting us on a massive scale. There's technology, there's competitors, even our own organization. So you can see from our protagonist there in gold, she's wondering, where do I begin, right? Because, it's very hard to get one's head around all of the information. It's called bounded rationality. There's only so much information we can absorb and assimilate. So that's a problem that we face right away in our first step gathering. So how do we overcome that? Well, it starts with a simple question or set of questions you need to ask yourself wherever you are in whatever organization you're working in. What do I need to know, and what are we doing today? And I like to divide this, and my colleague Laura, into what I'll call the micro and the macro. Ask yourself wherever you're working and your team to think about, what are the things we're working on today? Have you ever gotten so busy that you have a hard time pulling your head out of the day-to-day? And sometimes you do, and you say, wow, am I working on stuff that's really making a difference? Is this our highest priority? That's a good question to ask. Ask yourself and your team, why are we working on this right now? Is this our biggest priority? How does it align to what we're doing as an organization and where our organization is going in the future? That is not an academic question, despite working here at Brown. It's a very practical question that you need to ask, because if you can't think about what you're doing and how it relates, you won't be able to think about not only how it fits and creates value, but what additional value you can create in the future. What does success look like, and where can we do things more effectively, more creatively, better, faster? So it starts with a good grounding in where we are today, or where I am today, where my organization is today. But then we want to consider, what are some of the macro conditions that impact us in our environment, in our arena? Maybe technology or social issues are the most important factor. we work now in education, which Clay Christensen famously said. He was from Harvard Business School. Most people are familiar with disruptive innovation. He said years ago, the education market is ripe for disruption. Certainly over the last several years, even recently, we're seeing all kinds of turbulence taking place in our market as well. And it's relevant to all of us. But what are the trends that are having the greatest impact on your organization today, and more importantly, into the future? Look at competitors, look at partners, look at adjacent industries. And then the real question is, what are the things that we should be doing now, or I should be doing now as a team leader to prepare for that? It's really important. And I think oftentimes we think really, really broadly in a general sense. And what I think can be very helpful for you is to sort of, put your roots down a little further where you're planted today and understand what you're doing, and then use that as a stepping off point to look into the macro environment. And then that's a virtuous cycle, right? The things you're learning about what your team is working on, your organization, should inform what you're doing search-wise at the macro level, and vice versa. So where can you gather information internally and externally? Start with your organization's strategic plan, 10K, financial reports, senior leader speeches. I won't read each bullet point to you. You can see those. And then competitively, you can get information from other organizations or from customers, et cetera. So a coaching exercise for you is, you can do it right now. Can you get a copy of your organization's strategic plan, your 10K, if you're a publicly traded corporation, earnings call transcript? One of the things that I used to do in a prior life, and hopefully we'll do here, is really interesting and how many of you are guilty of this? Please don't put it in the chat. Have you ever listened to your company's earnings call or read the transcript? If you do, great. If you haven't, you should. There's a lot of really good information. It not only sensitizes you to what is on the minds of your leaders, it helps align your work and engages you in having a conversation with them on topics that are important. Now, I did this for Brown. We actually have a strategic plan. We actually have a set of financial statements. These are all publicly available. We have a research summary that we put together from some of the fantastic work we're doing. We even have a history of Brown. And there are some of our, I dare say they're competitors, but there's other organizations that are nearby us, both geographically and strata-wise, that have planning documents as well. There's a lot of great information in there. That's going to sensitize me, my colleagues, anybody, to what we are thinking about at the highest levels of our organization, what we're concerned with, and put us in a position not only to align our work, which is part of what we're doing here today, but also be thinking about what can I do to get a better sense of what the future might hold for, in our case, the education business. So I'd encourage you right now, reach out to your own organization, find out if you have a strategic plan, or if you don't have one, find out if there's documents or financial statements or any information that will help you start that gathering process, in particular, looking at the micro. Now, once you get that information, and you can also look at competitor information, industry trends, analyst reports, that information generally for publicly traded companies is available. You might have to do a little more digging in the popular business press, but that's okay, or whatever trade associations you may belong to. And they're also a great source of information. And that is not a one and done activity. As you're gathering information and you're pulling it together, you want to start thinking about how can I organize this information in a way that's going to help me understand more about it. So quantitative analysis is typically numeric, or it's data oriented around financial or quantitative information. Qualitative tends to be around text or images or things of the like. So what you want to think about is, you don't have to do one or the other, but you want to pull them together in a way that enables you to do some basic analysis. And I think this is where people tend to shy away. That's really for just very, people who do that for a living. I don't need to think about that. No, you do. You want to spend time thinking about analysis. You don't have to, be a PhD in engineering from a school that focuses on quantitative analysis, but you do want to ask some basic things of whatever data you collect. Say it's customer service data, or it's just feedback data, or it's the kind of data that you've got just from reading the reports and information are provided. Ask if the information you're getting is useful. Some of it may be dated, some of it may be current, but you want to make sure wherever you're getting it from, whatever credible source you're getting your data or information from, it's useful to you. You want to filter out anything that's not useful. Your time is valuable. You don't want to spend time on, if you have partially completed surveys or very outdated information that's not usable. But then you want to think about organizing, structuring, and formatting the information or data so you can work with it. Obviously Excel or tools like that are very useful for quantitative data. And I'm going to give you something that I think is useful for some more qualitative data. This is sort of a tricky term for some people, variables, something that varies. But the idea is that you want to put it in some type of relationship to one another so you could start to figure out what those patterns look like. And you want to engage in some type of exploration. You want to explore the data so you could figure out what's going on. Now, some things to think about have to do with patterns, relationships, and anomalies. As you immerse yourself in data, and again, I want to be clear, this is not a one and done thing. You need to do this over time. You will start to see patterns emerge. You'll start to find things over and over, and you'll start to intuit and identify where there are relevant relationships. Don't be quick to discard anomalies. If something looks peculiar or unusual, that can be a really rich place to find something that's out of the ordinary and may give you an insight that you didn't have previously. One tool that's very simple to use, and this comes from Miro. We're not making a case for any particular software application. I want to be clear. It's just illustrative, is the mind map. And what I like about this tool, and some of you probably have used it, is it's a great way to organize concepts and put them in levels of abstraction or a hierarchy from a primary topic to a secondary, tertiary. Think of yourself on a whiteboard. It can be, this is a tool that's obviously online. It's a great way to share information with your team and start identifying relationships and take that raw information and then start to plot it in a way that you can structure the data and information in a way that you can start seeing those patterns and relationships. It's really, really important to be able to do that. This is a great team activity, right? This is something, there's oftentimes I'll hear people say, well, if I don't have time for it, other people, they're busy too. Carve out an hour a month, which is not asking a lot. You're spending your lunch with me. You could spend a different day with your team. Have them do a little bit of data and homework, and that's in the guide if you're using that. And then think about how do we start to pull out and share information. You're going to build that skill yourself with your team if you do it. And you're going to find, I think, that that's a valuable practice to get into that will enhance your not only your strategic thinking, but your understanding. As you're doing that, be thinking about some joggers. Sorry about that. What are some of the trends that are emerging? What are some of the key things I need to think about in our business? What's the biggest risk today, 5 years out, 10 years out? What's the worst thing that could happen in kind of a black swan event? What our competitors are doing that are immediate? Which organizations are our competitors today might become one? What are some of the trends? People tend, my observation is, this is anecdotal, but people tend not to dig into this analysis step. It can be time consuming. It can feel that you're messing around and not getting anything out of it initially. I assure you, you are. As I think it's Pasteur who said, chance favors the prepared mind. So you need to spend time asking questions, looking over information. Sometimes you don't spot a pattern first time. Don't disregard things that are unusual or unexpected. Don't ignore adjacencies or things that are right on the periphery. There may be great information and variables or drivers that impact your organization very nearby, but right out of plain sight. And then you want to look at different levels. And that's why you see something like the mind map can be so helpful, because you look at a higher level and a lower level, and you can calibrate back and forth between the two. It's called zooming in and out. Now, once you've had a chance to analyze your information, and again, it's not a 1 hour activity, you can work with your team over time and build out your mind map or your database or whatever tools you're using. You want to translate that analytical activity into a creative one. You don't want to lose, it's not one or the other, but you want to have these work in a virtuous circle. You want to ask, what do we think is going to happen in those trend areas that we believe are most salient for our organization in the future? What are some of the things that we can do and see and get an idea of how the future might look? Remember, strategic thinking is a future-focused activity. It's grounded in what's happening today, but it's also projecting out what could happen in the future. And I say could because it's not guaranteed. So the critical thinking switches to more creative work. The variables that were most critical to you that you identified in that gathering stage, you're asking about, okay, what do we think will happen in the technology space in the future? What do we think the geopolitical environment might look like in the future? You will come up with a picture, if you will, based on, different probabilities, a simple high and low. You'll create a composite, or I like to say composites, because there could be different futures. Anyone that's done scenario planning knows that, it's not usually one future. There's very obvious variations that you'll see in the future that you want to point to and explore. but it's a might question. The future might look like this. It's not a guarantee. But the purpose of the activity isn't to be exactly right. It's to be directionally illustrative and start that thinking process about what the future could hold. And again, my contention is that we all can do that with a little bit of time. And don't be afraid to refine your view over time as you work with your team. Now, one of the things that I think is exceptionally important, and I would encourage you to think about, especially going back to your role as a leader, is establishing a point of view regarding the future. If I were to ask you in a hallway conversation, hey, what do you think is going to happen 5 years out from our business or our organization? I'd like you to have a point of view on that, an informed one, because anyone can have a point of view, but one that's based in some thinking you've done with your individually or with your team, based on data you collected, to ask yourself, what do we really think the future might hold? And it's okay to have different views on it. But the idea of being a strategic thinker is starting the process of getting out of that day to day and not just aligning your team to the future, but having a point of view on it. So that's something you can develop very clearly as a function of the work that you're doing, both individually and on your team. Way to do that is using a tool like the time cone from Amy Webb. She's at the Futures Institute. I think she's a professor at NYU as well. This is a really useful tool. It can be adapted for whatever organization, but you see there's horizons, right? The tactical horizon is kind of the in close. It's generally more predictable than not. What do we think is going to happen over the next, say, year or 2 years? And when we do strategic planning, the horizon is usually around 3 years. You'll hear, well, there are some companies with a 100-year horizon, other companies we can't plan past the 6-month level, but usually around 3 years, you could think about that, but it becomes a little less certain at that point in time. That sort of vision horizon extends to that 10-year mark. And then, when there's some system level changes, that happens beyond that. You can adjust the time ranges you see from Amy's work, that these are samples. But the idea here, again, remember, we gather information, we interrogate it, analyze it. Now we're working together as a team or individually to have a point of view on what the future might look like, what kinds of disruption could happen to us, what might be occurring over that horizon at that vision, at the period of 10 years of the vision horizon. And the way we do that is not just to think through and create these sort of narratives and associated data, but pictures of what that future might look like. So this is a snapshot from some work McKinsey did last year on global wealth and growth. And they've created, and summarizing clearly, this has come from quite a bit of data, these 4 sort of different scenarios. So you see the names of the scenarios up top, and you see some of the variables that are in there. What's the growth rate? What's the inflation rate? This is germane to the financial services industry, obviously, financial services and the economy in general, but the bank rate as well. So it's taking that data and information and putting it into some different scenarios and getting the perspective of, all the work that we've done is getting us to think about what might happen in the future. Something like this individually or on a team, you build it over time, but it's the process of building this can be very, very valuable. And it doesn't, again, have to be perfectly right, but getting your team together, getting yourself and your colleagues to think about what the future might look like can be very, very valuable. And if you are participating in strategic planning, I think it can be really useful, because one of the criticisms of strategic planning you see here is it's not oftentimes very strategic. So the last step is strategize, and that's making the choices and thinking about the decisions and priorities that you and your organization, your team would make today to fit as effectively as possible into what you think the future might hold. Again, back to what we talked about at that first step, one of the challenges is not only time, but when organizations go through this process, they tend to skip that analysis phase in some cases and really doing a good job thinking about what the future might hold. And they relegate strategic thinking to a kind of 1 time per year activity. And it's not. It should be something that you are doing as a leader in an ongoing manner for yourself, as well as for your team. So you should be thinking about what the implications are and what the future could hold, and constantly refining that viewpoint. It's really, really important that you do that. So again, I want to go back to this notion of developing a skill. The idea is to do that, develop a skill, you have to work on it. And what better way to work on it is not alone, but with your team, to come up with some ideas and potential strategies to contend with the challenges that your organization will invariably face, whether it's over the tactical or we'll say the vision horizon. And then here's a handy framework a lot of organizations use. Some of you are probably quite familiar with it. It's from Roger Martin and A.G. Lafley. It's Playing to Win: How Strategy Really Works. These are some great questions. Again, you can incorporate this into your strategic thinking process. it goes back, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What's called, the authors call the winning aspiration. What's the purpose of what we're doing here in this organization? How do we keep doing that? Where are the choices that we'll make in terms of calling it where we play? It's geographies, markets, products, services, the parts of the value chain that we'll be participating in. How will we distinctly create value? The notion of a value proposition. What capabilities need to be in place? What do we have to do well? That's why you see organizations transforming. And then what management systems are required? What are the things that we have to do to be effective in this world that we're trying to drive ourselves towards? So anybody can ask these questions, and they're quite useful, not just in a strategic planning or thinking activity, but in general. So to wrap up here, just to make sure to revisit our process, we've got gather, analyze, project, and strategize. Some action items for you. One of the simplest things you can do is just set some time aside, however often is practicable for you, in a place that's comfortable, to think about strategy and to think about what that future might look like. Determine what you want to know, and you can change your questions, but start off with, here's the things that I'd like to gather some information about, which would be useful for me, my team, my organization in general. Think about how you will go through the process of collecting that information, and really, before you even gather it, what are you going to do to analyze it? Because that's, I think, a weak step for a lot of individuals and organizations. And how do we go about that? We'll be doing some posts here at Brown that will give you some insights related to this webinar here in a few weeks. And then start that process. So I'm encouraging you to start the process. My colleague Laura and I would say, get going. There's plenty of things that you can do on your own with your team. You don't need a lot of sort of prompting to get moving. We will be coming back here in February and March. In February, we'll be talking about problem solving. If you're great at problem solving, good. You may just want to move to executive presence, which is, how do you make sure you communicate your problems and your solutions effectively? So hopefully this has been useful. Again, there's a lot of information on the resource site that we've provided to you. If this is something you want to do in mass in your organization, Brown can help you with that. We'd love the opportunity to. And by all means, we appreciate your patience and your time. And please feel free to contact me directly if you need anything. I'm more than happy to send the information that we have from today to you if you have any questions, and glad to answer those offline for you. With that, I would love to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Allison, who will tell us a little bit about where we're going next. And I think you have a poll set up for us, Allison.
I do. Thank you so much, Ed. This was absolutely incredible. And you can see you're getting a ton of positive feedback in the chat as well. We have very thoughtful questions that people have asked, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. But first, I would like to open this poll, which I'm going to launch right now, to ask you what you would like to see for the future of the Brown School of Professional Studies. As I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, we offer a portfolio of programming, short courses, master's degrees, and certificate programs on in-demand topics that help you advance in your career and make a positive impact on the workforce. And we are right now in the phase of starting to design and develop new programming, and we want to make sure that they meet your needs. So I have a short poll that is live now, so please take one moment to respond to it. Our first question is, which of the following courses would you be interested in enrolling in? And some of the options are branding myself and my ideas, coaching for diversity, equity, and inclusion, executive presence in a virtual world, leading to promote mental health and wellness in my organization, mindful leadership, negotiations, and sustainability and/or ESG. The second question is, what duration would you like a course to be? 1 to 3 days, 4 to 6 weeks, 2 to 3 months, or 6 months and above. The third question is, what time of day in Eastern time, so please calibrate that depending on where you're coming from, works best for you for us to offer these sessions. And the options are morning before 9 a.m., mid-morning 9 to 12, afternoon 12 to 5, or evening 5 or later, or an all-day or intensive. And then the last question is, what format do you prefer to take a class in? And the options are online, mostly synchronous, meaning live sessions like this one. Online, mostly asynchronous, meaning on demand and something that you're able to log into at any time. Online, fully asynchronous, meaning that there are no live sessions, or in person. And it looks like we've gotten quite a few responses in. It looks like we have about 3/4 of responses in. So I'm going to give it just another 10 seconds, and then I'll close the poll and share the results. So if you would still like to respond to this poll, we'd love to get your feedback. I'm going to close it in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. We got 80% of you responded. That's an incredible response rate. Thank you so much. And we will use this to inform the future of our portfolio. I'm sharing the results now just so you can see some of the trends we're seeing. So it looks like branding myself and my ideas and mindful leadership are very popular, mostly shorter programs. Oh, timing is quite divided. It looks like different people would like different times, and mostly synchronous, mostly online is looking like the most popular options. Thank you so much. That's very helpful. So now in our remaining 10 minutes, I'd like to get to as many questions as we can. And the first question I have for you, Ed, was asked a couple times in a couple of different ways. And that is, how do I manage up or influence leaders who seem disconnected with the rest of the organization to start thinking about things strategically? And for some people, they're specifically thinking about engaging and retaining staff.
A great question. So we do have influence and persuasion coming up at some point too. I think, I'll give you some thoughts to start things off. I think at some level you will have to do enough work to have again, like I mentioned, a point of view together on what you think are the key issues and why. Senior leaders or more senior leaders have a lot on their table, or a lot on their plate too. They don't.
Ed, you're coming in really quiet, and I'm not totally sure why. Can you just lean in a little?
Sure. Yeah, of course. So is that better?
It's a little better. And I think I'd also ask for you to project, and for others, if you're also experiencing this, just to turn your volume up on your computers.
Sorry about that. So the key is to make sure that you have an informed point of view and that you're consistent in not just having that point of view, but you need to link that issue to something that senior leaders in the organization care about. There's an area of literature called issue selling. I was just having this conversation with a colleague maybe a week or two ago. It's not that there's anything wrong necessarily with your issue. It's that you have an obligation, even as a middle level manager or wherever you are, to communicate it in a way that gets the attention of the people that you work with to make it part of their agenda. That's the thing I think you need to do to make it more relevant, is connected to something that that leader or those leaders care about.
Thank you. That's really helpful. This next question is a great one. They say that they work at an organization that serves a population, and they feel this great need and urgency to serve this population. So how do they balance, taking that step back, doing the strategic thinking, doing the information gathering, and also needing to continue on with the daily operations?
Yeah, a great question. Most of us can't shut down our daily work to go strategic think for a few days and then come back. So what you try to do is carve out a little bit of time here and there, knowing that everyone's under tremendous operational pressures, to try to have deliberate conversations about what you think, again, your organization can do to serve the population you have in the best way possible. And as importantly, think about you're trying to get ahead of what the population's needs will be in the future, right? So that's one of the things you can think about. But also you can give some thought to the sort of age-old questions of, are we delivering the services that we provide, or products, or whatever it is, to our population? I saw some points about volunteers. The same thing is relevant. Are we doing the work that we're doing now in the most efficient and effective way? And what are some of the demands that the future might hold for our population, to identify those needs ahead of time? So I think trying to stay ahead, which is very hard, I understand, when you're buried in day-to-day work, but that's kind of the key to more effective leaders, is carving out that time to not only understand what the needs are today and what we're meeting them, but think about the future needs.
Thank you. That's super helpful. We've gotten a couple questions about implementation, so I'm going to kind of combine a couple questions into one.
Sure.
One question is around timeline. So can you talk a little bit about, when you're in the implementation phase, how often should you be needing to check in on progress and making sure that things are moving forward? And how do you do the change management aspect of getting everyone aligned with the change as you're implementing?
Easy questions, easy questions. There's a couple things to think about. Typically, when you're doing work that's day to day, right? When you're managing sort of shorter term tactical type projects, you're meeting more frequently. I'll say, in some cases daily if you have a heavy operational tempo, or weekly or monthly. Oftentimes strategy doesn't change that much, but again, it depends on the speed of the industry. So it really varies in terms of, in industries, what's called clock speed sometimes. But you probably want to check in, maybe monthly or quarterly to have those more, I'll call them the big picture dialogue around, are the things that we're trying to accomplish relative to the future, are those happening, or do they need to be adjusted? Strategic planning and thinking is not an annual process, even though it's an annual process in many cases. But continuing to refine your picture of the future and communicate that in a way it gets to the change piece, where people have an understanding, and it won't happen after one email or one town hall, that the future is coming sooner rather than later. We need to start preparing for that. So there's an emotional side and there's a rational side. It gets into some of the Heath and Heath work on why people change. But that's good literature to look at. It's quite useful. And I think the idea is, in organizations, you have to do a lot of work to try to continually remind people of the fact the future is coming, and how well we're positioned for it.
Thank you. That's really helpful. One other question. So a lot of times we find ourselves in an echo chamber where we're experiencing a lot of groupthink. What recommendations would you give for helping leaders who are strategically planning get out of that echo chamber?
Sure. Great question. I think many of us suffer from the echo chamber challenge in the organizations we work with, if we come from people with like backgrounds, et cetera. So that's a case for diversity, right? We need to have people who bring non-traditional views to the table. So if you're talking about something like a team meeting, there's a couple of things you can do. Practically, you can assign somebody, called the devil's advocate, to actually look at things specifically from the counterpoint of view. You can assign that not just to an individual, but to a group. The military uses terms like red cell or tiger teams or things like that to look at things differently, or quote unquote from the opponent's perspective, with the express purposes of shooting holes in an argument. You can find people, sometimes, again, it depends on the relationship you have. Customers or suppliers or partners have a different view of your business. While we teach students, and sometimes students are looked at as the product of a program, they're also customers, and they have questions and comments and suggestions. Similarly, you can hire people or ask people who don't work in your organization from an outside perspective. Sometimes people use facilitators, or will bring someone in. You can hire a futurist. There's things you can do both organically and inorganically that can provide that, but it all presupposes that it will be accepted by the team that's going through that process. Yeah, the kill the company quote. That's a good one, Ryan.
Actually, I'm gonna cheat and have one more question, because I like
That's
this.
okay.
Very different. And also, it shouldn't take long to answer. This one is, do you have any podcasts you'd recommend for people who would like to continue to build on their leadership skills?
I think having taught at Harvard and having a colleague who went to Harvard, I think the HBR IdeaCast is a good place. It's not the only one. They have, there's the HBR IdeaCast. They have one on leadership. Those are the ones I know of that I tend to listen to. But there are many, many. I know people tend to like the 4-Hour Work Week. I can't remember the gentleman's name, or Ryan Holiday, who's the Stoicism person. There's lots of different sources, but I tend to migrate toward HBR and HBP stuff because I think they do a pretty good job. Tim Ferriss, thanks for that, Cindy. I think they do a pretty good job of canvassing, the world of management and leadership and bringing it together. So happy to hear of other. There's some of you have great resources on your own if you come across, and I think one of the things we try to do at Brown is share that as well. So it's not the only resource, but I think HBR is a pretty reliable one.
Absolutely. And they also have a Women at Work one, and that's one of my
There you
favorites. And that one looks a little bit more at the personal side of leadership, of kind of your own career advancement and some leadership skills that are a little bit more specific for women. So that one is also one of my favorites as well. And it looks like we're getting some in the chat.
Thanks, Oscar. Yeah,
well.
and Yoni. Yeah.
So Thank you all so much for joining us. We had a really incredible response to this masterclass. This is our first masterclass that's focused on core leadership skills, but as Ed mentioned, it will not be our last. We are going to be offering this on a monthly basis. I put in the chat a link to look at and to register for our future ones. The next two are on unlocking problem solving and executive presence. We'd love to see you there. We'll also send the slides and the recording from today and some information about our short courses, certificate programs, and master programs if you are interested in continuing to learn from incredible faculty like Ed. And I want to thank all of you for being here today too. We know your lives are very busy, and yet over 300 of you showed up today and over 700 people signed up to receive the recording to be able to upskill in order to take advantage of opportunities to upskill yourself for yourself, but also to make an impact on the world. And we need leaders like you to change the way the world works for good. And we hope that the School of Professional Studies can be your chosen partner in achieving that mission. So thank you all so much for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.